Good morning. My name is Desmond Davis, and we're here to discuss ECOWAS at 50. My guest, Dr. Fatima Akilu, Director of the NIM Foundation in Nigeria, Dr. Ekaite Ikpe, Director of the African Leadership Center in London, and Professor Medani Tedesi, who's of the Africa World Institute. Dr. Akilu, I mean, we're now hearing that we need an ECOWAS of the people. Is that feasible at the moment?
I think so. I think if we are really intentional, people are crying for a different kind of representation from ECOWAS, especially people from the field. So I think if we can center the need of people, especially in some of our most marginalized communities, and if we can listen to really what they want, what kind of representation, what kind of citizenship makes sense for them going into the next 50 years of ECOWAS.
Yes, Dr. Ikpe, we cannot actually blame ECOWAS as such, because it was only after 15 years of existence the whole thing collapsed. It became more of peace and security and that sort of thing. So it hasn't actually achieved what it was supposed to do, because for the last 30 years it's been involved in peace and security rather than getting people together.
So, I mean, I'd put it this way. While it has had to pivot to think about peace and security concerns, those were inextricably linked to the purpose of economic integration to which it had been set up to, or for which it had been set up to address. You can't think about economic integration if you don't have a situation of peace, if people cannot move or trade with each other freely. So I think it was right for ECOWAS to pivot in that way, to think about peace and security, to be able to also deliver its objective of economic integration. I also think as an organization, it is transitioning across periods. So I think it's all right to recognize that, yes, 15 years after, it had to pivot in that way. And in this moment is an opportunity to think again about such pivots.
Yes, Professor Tedesi, I think it's very important now for ECOWAS, not just ECOWAS, all regional organizations in Africa, to come together because of the way the world is now closing down on Africa.
Yes, but in what direction, in what sense, in what kind of priorities? I think the problem now is that Africa's regional organizations, well, ECOWAS is not to blame in many respects, because it has been a veteran in terms of, establishing and operationalizing, most of the values and principles, whether it is in civil society networking or the framework developed. It has been an example. But I think the other regional organizations have a different set of problems, mainly the African Union. Okay, Africa needs to be well organized, and these regional organizations need to, be responsive to the current challenges and needs. But are they prepared to do that? And Eka was mentioning, like, they are interlinked. For me, whether it's about citizenship or about communities, about peoples, I think the real issue is, can they achieve regional integration, or can we have strong regional organizations without having internal peace, for instance? So I think that becomes a critical issue here. Yeah.
Yes, but Dr. Akilu, this is the problem, for example, with Nigeria. While we're talking about integration, you have groups in Nigeria that want to split up the country. So how do we go about that?
I think it's about inclusion. I think a lot of times when you see secessionist movements and people who want to go their own way, it's not because they're rejecting, for example, the country or the regional body, in this case ECOWAS, it's because they don't feel included in the wider project. So I think really this is an opportunity. Yes, we've been bogged down by insecurity issues, And regional bodies such as ECOWAS have rightly focused on that to a certain extent. But this is a time now that these are protected long-term problems. I think we can do two things at once. We can focus on security issues, but we can also focus on the issues that really mean a lot to people, which is about a sense of belonging, a sense of having opportunities within the regions where they sit.
Well, that's the point, Dr. Ikpe. There are some groups in Africa that are still saying that African countries to go back to the pre-Berlin Conference borders. So that is more or less creating more of a divide in the continent, isn't it?
Yes, and I think we can go down the route where we deliberate on, specific borders, but that will not resolve any of these issues. I think, as Dr. Akilu has mentioned, the question is one of whether people feel or sense themselves as part of a project, as part of a unit. These questions about returning to a previous existence, returning to previous forms, often because people are dissatisfied with the current arrangement. And so the question, it seems to me, ought to be one of why do people feel, where is this discontent from? Why do they feel dissatisfied with the arrangement? Because redrawing borders, if we don't address the underlying issue, we're going to face those problems in these new spaces again.
So, Professor Tadesse, what Dr. Ikpe is more or less saying that there's a failure of leadership in Africa that is causing all the problems, isn't it?
Yes, it's across the board, I think, even mainly in regional organizations. You have a crisis of leadership. What we have been witnessing in the last 5 years or 6. In fact, I tried to follow this since 2017. There has been a reversal of values and leadership, mainly at the continental level. Most of the leaders have become transactional. They became even detached with what is going on in the rest of the continent, And so these reversals are critical in terms of, the type of leadership we have. But again, when it comes to, I think in terms of, the issue of internal peace that I mentioned is critical because people are dissatisfied and many governments are losing legitimacy. And so maybe they are looking for a new type of social contract, right? So without having that, how can you have strong regional organizations? And how can these regional organizations also protect member states while they cannot even protect themselves, from foreign pressure and the like? I think it's very complex,
Yeah, Dr. Akilu, since you work with a lot of people directly, I believe that Africans have lost the mind games. There's no self-belief in most Africans because they listen to negative news and stories that come from abroad that aim to just dislocate their thinking. So we need to change the mindset of Africans to self-belief. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I think it's very complex. I think, yes, it's true that we have a lot of misinformation, disinformation.
Yes.
I think we're also pivoted in terms of so-called values towards a certain direction because a lot of us are still part of the Western education project. And within that, certain values about self and where you locate yourself are also embedded within the education system. So I think we grow up thinking in a certain way. And if you look at what's happened maybe in the last 30, 40 years with this emphasis on self, you need to look after yourself, you need to put yourself first and things like that. I think that has seeped into the consciousness, not just of Africans, but globally. But even as we see that, we see the other side where there's a sense of African consciousness growing, a sense of a redefinition of who we are, and a rejection of so-called Western values, and where we try to locate ourselves in terms of how we see ourselves. So I think there's a lot of things happening that's really difficult to unpack. It's very complex. We're at a crossroads, I think.
Yeah, Dr. Ikpe, that's the point. The young people are driving Pan-Africanism, whereas the leaders are set in their old ways. So how can they themselves, the young people, accept Pan-Africanist revolution that can change the minds of leaders? I mean, like the African Leadership Center is one thing that is doing that sort of thing.
Yes. No, absolutely. I think there's a lot of conversation we've heard here from Professor Tadesse, from Dr. Akilu, about the importance of this moment. And absolutely, this point about young people reasserting themselves, we can think of in the creative economies, for example, this idea of being African, this pride in being African, this celebration, if you like, in a way that actually is attracting attention from many other parts of the world. So yes, they're moving with that. And we can say, older people, the older generations have drifted somewhat from that. But let's also recall that there have been previous periods like this. I think it's really important to connect to previous moments of this nature, where those older people, some of the same older people, have themselves been very significant for those, periods of African Renaissance, those periods of, rethinking what it means to be African, those periods of reasserting an African position on a global stage. So for us, and the work we do at the African Leadership Center is often to think about how we connect this energy to those experiences, those stories, but also some of the risks in losing the momentum the momentum of a moment, right? Yes, we feel like that. We assert some of these ideas in this moment, but to what extent can we move that into a space that becomes more transformation?
Yeah,
I might do some hot pursuit on that.
Yeah.
I mean, I like that because you see what happened with Africa's, the revitalization, like the transition from the Organization of African Unity to the AU. It didn't happen in a vacuum, by the way. It was about leadership. Yeah. There was a strong intellectual leadership space. Intellectual, but also political. You had the Mbekis, you had the Melisses, It didn't come, simply because, it had to transition. Now, with the crisis of leadership that I have, mentioned, which metamorphosed, in recent years, there is no intellectual, continental leadership space. So what the ALC and the APS are trying to do is to fill this vacuum. It's like a transitional period until the African political leadership, emerges, to take that role. Yeah,
well, that's the problem. You see, after South Africa became free, I think African leaders just sat back thinking we've achieved something. That's what is also creating problems in Africa. We finally achieved the freedom of the continent. Let's just sit back. Well, that should have been the start of moving the continent forward.
Yes, but again, it's even with South Africa, I have a different set of issues, in the sense that it's about prioritization. Yeah. Okay. South Africa took Israel to the ICC for, 20,000-30,000 people killed. And yet they are silent when 1 million are killed in Africa, or Sudan, or Ethiopia. Can you say? What is this? So where is our priority? And when we talk about these people-centered, regional communities, I think the priority should be human lives. Yeah. Africans, including African regional organizations, even the political elite, even the academic elite, they are angry and they feel provoked when some Western leaders say something about Africa. Yes. But when an African leader kills even 500,000, they don't get provoked or irritated. I think we have a critical problems here. And this is not only limited to the African Union or African regional organizations or African political, even the Pan-African movement, even the Black Agenda report. If you see how they try to mediate this, I think we need to come to terms and have an honest discussion what Pan-Africanism means, what African interests means in terms of, the global engagement. Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Akilu, that's the point. Africans are not talking to each other. I mean, like you noted the other day for our magazine, African governments will spend millions of dollars to pay lobbyists in Washington, yeah, rather than spend that money to develop their own society. So the mind game is still a problem for Africa.
Absolutely, and I think I can see where you're going, Professor. Really, I'm not quite sure where to locate this kind of insecurity that we have as Africans, where we're always outward looking, Western facing,
Yes.
and we are letting them set the pace, set the agenda, and even in terms of what is important to discuss, to put energy. And what I see that maybe we're not talking enough about as Africans, I don't think there's anything left to be offered by the West. I think everything that's happening today is happening from our continent. The innovation, the energy, the youth, the forward thinking. So we do spend a lot of time criticizing what hasn't worked. But we must remember that within those things that haven't worked, there's a lot that has worked. And that's why we're even talking about them today. Yes, I think that the leadership has gone inwards, where maybe at the start of these regional bodies, it was more Pan-African, looking at who we are as Africans. But I think we've reached a certain level of comfort where we're not struggling for independence. We don't have these big existential threats. So we've become more comfortable, and the leadership has changed. And I think also one of the things that Professor Eckham mentioned, and you, Desmond, about the training at the ALC, the young people that I've engaged in at the ALC, sometimes being at the ALC is the first time they've had to locate themselves and
Indeed,
what they think about as Africans, because they're not taught that at all.
They're not.
So when you're thinking about leadership for young people, it's a Western concept of leadership. And so, yes, you're right, Professor. We need to do more about looking inward as Africa. What should our leadership be? How do young people locate themselves in the struggles of the continent? Why should it be important to young people when they all want to go abroad to the West?
And it's the wrong impression they get from the West. You know, I mean, they sell themselves so well. I mean, America, you think that's heaven on earth, but you know how violent America is. Why do they still go there? Why do they believe that they can go to America and make it?
I think this is too international political migration.
Because you tell them that things are rough, things are tough, but they still want to go. And, you know, why?
So I think it connects to what both my co-panelists have said here about who is prioritized in all of this. It's not all young Africans who are saying they have to go to the West. It is those for whom there seems to be no other option, so that the very desperate picture you have painted of the West becomes an option. And I think that is the question when you said, the conversations about regionalization, about anything we're doing, where is who are the Africans we're talking about? Where is the person? We said it has to be about lives. Which lives? And I think many times we talk about African lives, but we are all referring to a different set of African lives. And those, to my mind, who are seeing these very dangerous journeys as the option, I think the question we have to ask ourselves is what happens for our fellow citizens to think that kind of an arduous journey is an option. And we have to, in a sense, take some responsibility for that. Many of us will exist in spaces where there are folks that are not in our own settings or context who might consider that. But, where are these communities and spaces where this is the norm? And because you hear of these stories, it's not one person, it's not two people. What have we created where there is plenty? There is plenty. There is innovation. And there are young people who are working against the odds, actually, to do a lot of these incredible things. But then we also have people who are falling through the cracks. And that dissonance, because I agree, I don't like the picture that's painted about this whole doom and gloom. We know it isn't, right? We're here, we know it's not like that. But there is a dissonance. And I think I agree with Professor Atadesse here. That dissonance doesn't seem to be of the utmost importance in the work of those who are in a position to do anything about it. It is almost taken for granted that, well, those folks will fend for themselves. However, are those lives as important as the other set of lives we came to keep discussing and thinking about?
Well, Professor, that's the point. It's to do with leadership. African leaders don't care about Africans going abroad because they're the ones who are sending remittances to do the work of to create a social safety net for their people. So they're happy to Africans to go abroad. Even the Kenyan government has been exporting labor to the Gulf states. How can we then resolve this issue?
Well, it is, as we said, I mean, this is at the risk of repeating. I mean, it's about, socio-economic crisis, about governments not being responsive. But my concern is really, I try to isolate the concern for these socio-economic problems from the broader issues like the international, relations of Africa and what priorities should we, have in terms of, for me, what are really African agendas, do we have coherence and agreement on that? I think it has been hijacked in the sense that, like, for instance, people equate state sovereignty with the sovereignty to kill. People equate, like, for instance, borders are sacrosanct, whatever the implications of, in terms of human integration, in terms of lives, in terms of socio-economic, all of that. So I think this prioritization of African agendas need to be revisited. So that's why we can link it also to the regional organizations. Let me tell you one thing, very interesting. The other day I was, giving a talk in Prague, and the title, of course, was Mass Atrocities and Africa's International Relations. If you look at the resolutions of the UN that were voted, the most successful African agenda was to block human rights violations in conflict areas. Can you imagine? Human rights violations in Africa. So are these African agenda? So that's why I was hearing, for instance, yesterday, there was no time, and I didn't want even to, to take advantage of my podium, but they were saying regional organizations are a voice. Whose voice? Whose voice, really? Yeah, I think, these are critical issues.
Yes, that's the point, Dr. Akilu. Even this free movement is a problem in ECOWAS after all these years, isn't it? Because people still complain about the border guards extorting bribery and just stopping people from traveling. So, how can we then get an ECOWAS of people when even the free movement is not free?
I think it's because it's driven by fear. So borders become very securitized and restricted freedoms. For example, talking about Nigeria, because we've had Al-Qaeda elements, Boko Haram and the like, borders have become overly policed, even splitting families from each other because of this fear. So I think, when we decide on free movement, we need to understand what exactly is free movement. We've also had issues where borders were closed because of economic issues. For example, Nigeria closed the border with several countries because we wanted to grow our agri industry. And that was devastating for both Nigerians who export into other countries and also countries that imported. The price of food went up. So I think governments always make these calculations because at the end of the day, everyone just thinks about things in terms of their own national sovereignty. We're not thinking about ourselves as a West African bloc. We can talk at the high level at ECOWAS, but when you see how states behave, everyone is very guarded about their own national sovereignty.
Yes.
I can just add to that a little bit. I think that's a very valid point, so that when regionalization does work, it relies very much on states driving or focus on a particular agenda, and they push that to completion. But we always have these tensions, between that central agenda and national agendas. And part of that is around how economies are organized, right? So indeed, what Dr. Akilu has outlined there, this tension between a free movement of goods and trade, but also protecting those who are producing within particular countries, of course, because politicians in a particular country have to answer to their nationals before they answer to, any other groups in a regional setting, even though we have a supranational system that should be dealing with or address that. I think those are realities that have to be worked through in any kind of regional arrangement, and just trying to understand the positions from which these decisions are also coming.
Well, that's the point, Professor Tedesse. I mean, will the African Continental Free Trade Area work even though we don't have regional integration? How will that work?
I think, most of the trade and the economic infrastructure, all of that need to be, diverted, and that's why I was trying to say that, can we have even, a strong regional organization or regional economic communities without having core economic basis, anchoring that regional integration? That's why I was trying to ask, what is the coal and steel of West Africa? You cannot simply go around and, try to say, today is agriculture, tomorrow is green energy. No, you cannot do that. So that is very important. And secondly, it's about, as I have said, it's about internal peace, and it's about having a common political view and a common feature. So you cannot simply complicate peace, for instance, internal peace. It's about people having a feeling of having a feature. I mean, it's not bringing them any goods now, So do we have those preconditions met in West Africa? I think that is very critical. So when we say a political community, like for instance, it could be parliamentary democracy. There must be an agreement. It could be a constitutional order, or it could be a big tent politics. It could be a strong man's, whatever it is, there must be coherence and clarity. You work towards that. So unless we have these organizing principles, I think
I would agree with that, if I may. I mean, I think this point about cohering, and I think it speaks a little bit to the earlier point around the tension between sort of a regional economic agreement, which says there should be free movement of goods, and a national agenda that is insisting on industrial development, which means it has to produce its own goods for its citizens. And so absolutely, as we think of AFCFTA, it has to align with conversations about industrial development that are regional. Not the work of national actors and national industrial strategies feeding into an AFCFTA, so that we can think of value chains that cut across regions. One part has cotton. It may be that it's more efficient to produce, fabric or textiles somewhere else. Labor may feed in from somewhere else. Now, the structures of the regional arrangement have to be able to support that kind of agenda. But the point I do want to sort of wrap this point up with is that we have to think of questions of equity. Because when you do split up value addition processes across a region in that way, different proportions of value will be held in different countries. The one producing the cotton will probably not generate as much as who is producing the textile, right? How will we deal with that, right? That cannot just be left to, we'll see where the chips land. There has to be a conversation about how it has to be a different way of thinking about economic collaboration. We cannot replicate those hierarchical structures that African spaces have had with global North economies and are now having with other global South economies like China. This must look different to that. We cannot create a new hegemon that is the one capturing all the value and the others are left to one side. That regionalism is not about everyone.
If you see now the economic situation, mainly the big economy in Africa, you see this competition for control of the supply chains, between Beijing and mainly Washington. Where are Africa's regional organizations?
Indeed.
Have they tried?
Yeah.
I mean, people are talking about the Lobito corridor.
Yes.
Does SADC have any stake?
Exactly.
This is a critical issue, Minerals. What is going on? So how can we claim to be economic communities while the major economy is being removed and eroded under the carpet? Which economy are we talking about? Yeah, I mean, these are the issues now, mainly now, that are emerging. All these extractive industries, all these deals. By the way, now, you remember, countries want to reduce their tariffs, from Washington, and they go bilaterally, separately. And, the irony is that to be at the table, to surrender their resources, they have to pay for lobbyists, for booking appointments and the like. This is where we are. And now, this conventional trade agreements, negotiations, based on national priority, based on national interest, are marked now by their absence. In law, in process, in public discussion. No way.
And I think
this is where we are. So this is a critical role that regional organizations should play now.
This is the point on leadership.
Yeah.
Because you outlined that, and especially I think on this point around strategic minerals, what you say about this new, so coming away from even fossil fuel that has continued now with strategic or critical minerals, this is carrying on. But these are so significant for the present moment and for the future across the continent.
Right.
You see major expansion in the use of solar energy technologies. These are the minerals that power those technologies. So we are demanding them, but importing them.
Right.
And we hold the minerals. These are, very fragile, supply chains in terms of these minerals. That this places us in a position of such influence. And we're not deploying that. Individually, it's difficult to deploy that. But collectively, the possibilities are immense.
Yes, Dr. Akile, that's the point. In Africa, 600 million people don't have access to electricity. You've got oil, you've got coal in Nigeria, and you have a problem with power because the Western NGOs are telling us forget about all these fossil fuels. But we should tell them we are not going to forget about fossil fuels. We need to develop. They developed using coal and that sort of resources. So what's the situation now in Nigeria in terms of using coal and oil to provide power?
Well, I think just going back to the issue of leadership, I think leadership is at the center of this. Yes, all the critical minerals are on our soil, even agriculture and stuff. But I think we're still under the yoke of the West, who dictate to us how and when and at what pace we can develop. If you can imagine, Nigeria did not sign the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement for years. Why? Because we had so much pressure from the West.
Yes.
And unless we decide that this is what we want to do for our continent, we will continue to be dictated to by the West. Can you imagine in Nigeria where Western nations are telling us not to use coal to develop our power? But there we go, we see America now really reindustrializing through coal, yet they don't allow African countries. So I think unless we get leaders that are willing to stand up for what is in the best interest of their people and are brave enough, and I tell you, it's very, very difficult. I'll give you an example. When I was in the NSA office, this is under President Obama, the US absolutely refused to sell arms to Nigeria. Even though Boko Haram were killing thousands of our citizens. They said it was not in the national interest or whatever. On top of that, they went to all the European partners and prevented them from selling arms to Nigeria. We had to go to Russia because we were so desperate. So these are all the geopolitical power plays to keep us down. And it's changing a bit because now we have more avenues of support because there's with this multipolar world, there's a lot more. But I still think that we have to have bold leaders that can decide that we are going to invest in a certain industry that is beneficial to our people, regardless of the forces that try to prevent it from happening.
No matter what you say, the Western countries look at Africa all the time and try to outwit these countries. Look at Donald Trump's Africa advisor, Massad Boulos, born in Lebanon, grew up in Nigeria, was head of PZ, and he knows how to deal with African leaders. He goes
18 months ago, he was selling used cars in Nigeria.
Yes, exactly.
Now
he's there. But he goes to African countries, he knows how to deal with African leaders and hear that they're signing an agreement with America. You see, so how do we tackle this?
I think everything has become shaky and transactional. People say transactional, but mainly when it comes to Africa, it's very shaky. and we are not trying to bring together all our resources or our, political capital, a united voice, to navigate this. I think that's one of the critical issues now we see. So, you see, for instance, what happened in the DRC. SADC is absent. SADC is absent. The East African Community is absent. Then what happened? Okay, the AU, EAC, East African Community, and SADC tried to come together and, have a declaration and write to the US that they want to be part of this process. No. These are African countries. Right. DRC and Rwanda and the African regional organizations don't have a table. You see, so that's why I'm saying sometimes, when we say we have more avenues, do we have more avenues? It's not the opportunity, it's about your preparedness, Sudan. Yes. The Sudan peace process up to now is being held in Jeddah. Yeah. And not only that, at one time, the U.S. Special Envoy for Sudan, recently in a radio, he said, maybe next time we'll invite the UAE and the African Union. Imagine, the African Union is completely a spectator in a conflict, which is in Sudan. So imagine how we have lost because of leadership. Yeah. Everything was an African-led process. Absolutely. Now, the African Union writes letters to be invited. Yeah. Not to decide, but to be a piece of furniture in the room, this is where we are. We have to be blunt. Yeah. We have to be brutal about the situation that we are in now.
But also African themselves, African leaders, African politicians will have to respect for themselves. Like, I get press releases from groups saying something about a certain African government. Then they'll copy all the Western diplomatic missions in their country. So why do they have to report to these diplomatic missions in their country? When they have a problem with a local issue, why do you think they behave in that manner?
Well, do we have the agency? That's the most important thing. Do we know our agency? Do we know African agency? We are not. It's everything as I'm saying. There was a revitalization of the African, continent, African regional organizations. There were truly African processes, at least led, maybe financed by outsiders. But now we are even losing the political and the intellectual leadership, let alone the finances. So I think,
I'd add to that. I think all of that points us, because I really like this, we talk about the moment, but reflect on where we've come from. Yeah. And it points to the fragility of even our successes. Yes. That even as we're in this moment, reflecting on ECOWAS at 60, trying to, suggest or propose some key points, some priorities to focus on for the path forward, that is future focused, that is solution oriented, even that is fragile. Mm-hmm. Even that is at risk of an onslaught, unpredictability of it. Also the global environment we're existing in today. No one would have imagined this of the African peace and security architecture. That if you thought into the future that there would come a point where the African Union would be invited to this, maybe invited to discuss this situation. Absolutely. And so in all we're doing, not to be complacent. Mm-hmm. But I think we've said it here again and again, the role of leadership. In fact, the founding father of ECOWAS, Professor Adebayo Adedeji, has often criticized, if we think of another major period of huge challenges on the African continent with structural adjustment programs, where we've said, this is what was done by the World Bank and the IMF, which, yes, it was. But he has often said, but this was only done because of who he termed comprador elites on our continent that collectively agreed to this. These things cannot be, yes, these are very powerful systems and structures. There's a coloniality to them. They're structural. I don't want to give the argument that these are simple spaces and these are simple dynamics that we can overcome. But we have sort of navigated these hierarchies in the past. We've had these periods, and we've spoken about some of these periods across this time, and we have to do that again. but we have to protect that space.
Yes, and Dr. Akilu, I mean, we must hand it to young Africans, despite the struggles, when it comes to sports, football. They are now in demand all over the world. And that was because of the show of the Cameroon team in 1990. That's when they realized that Africans can play good football. So, I mean, the young people are doing their best, and they are portraying Africa in a good light when they perform football. And,
I think you're right.
Yes.
Young people are leading the way in many fields. Sports is one, absolutely. The sport is on the map and has been doing that for a long time. It's not a recent thing. But if you go to any bookshop anywhere in the world, it's full of Nigerian books, Nigerian authors. Absolutely, the literature scene has exploded. If you look at art, Nigerian art is absolutely everywhere. Music, we all know. Nollywood, even the regional film industries, Kannywood, the Yoruba film industry, dubbed, it's been exported all over the world. So I think there is a real energy in the creative sector, but also in technology. People don't talk about the innovations that are coming from Africa in technology. It's really, really very advanced, but also the new thinking of young Africans. I mean, we keep talking about these regional bodies that are middle-aged now and going into old age. There is a new Africa emerging, and if we continue to think about where we are, it seems almost like we're static. We're not. These young people are thinking differently. They're thinking about Africa. They're not getting their news from CNN and BBC. They are more discerning, and they're not so... they're making their own narratives. They're not so tied to the Western narrative that our leaders are, that the best things come from West. We talk about a lot of Africans migrating, but we don't talk about how many are coming back, educated with talent. So I kind of see that there are possibilities.
Can I just add to that? I mean, I think that's absolutely the case. The football, creative economies, all of that, hugely impressive and really sources of great pride for us. What I will say, though, is that those extractive structures remain intact, so that with all of this success we see, actually the retention of value from these spaces is primarily not staying on the continent, right? So the resources generated from the music. Maybe Nollywood is different because that is a truly it's a truly local center. But if you think of the music, you think of the literature as well, because as authors grow, they migrate to particular publishers. The same with the artists. You know, as they grow, they move to the big record companies. And let's not talk about the digital platforms that are playing that music that we all access, but the value from that is in Sweden with a certain, firm. That is what, and the footballers, I mean, think of the circulation of capital that underpins football. Where are African countries in that? Again, it's raw materials. We're giving this incredible, folks out, and that, all of that talent, even though very refined, very sophisticated, is treated in the global economy as raw materials, so that those who are capturing the most value tend not to be located on the continent. So young people are doing their best, but these institutions hold the responsibility to give them the best environment to be able to achieve that. We're in an era where you have to think of intellectual property rights, artificial intelligence, where permissions are being granted to companies to draw on everything that they can draw on to build those systems. Where are Africans in that conversation? Individual countries or sectors cannot go and have conversations with OpenAI. They cannot do that. That is the role of the African Union, of ECOWAS, who will go collectively and say, actually, from our quarters, these are the sort of negotiations we have to have, right? With all of these actors. Individuals cannot. Young people are doing what they must, right? But we don't want to come back to the kind of conversation we've had about oil, about critical minerals, and have that same conversation about our technology spaces and our entertainment industry.
Okay, so the long and short of it is to create more space for African
young people. This energy, whether it's creativity or sports, need to be channeled by some kind of leadership,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
There must be
absolutely.
continental, regional, or national leadership. That's what we are talking here, That's the most
Yeah,
important thing
yeah.
here. And now the most important issues are like data mining. We
Yes.
don't control our data. Whether there is a creativity or a
Yeah,
sport, what's the
everywhere.
point?
Exactly.
I was saying the other day that now, because data are being stored elsewhere, African countries will open data embassies. In here, no,
this is
we'll have
being
data
rolled out,
embassies.
yeah.
Otherwise, this is where we are,
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Fatima Kilu, Dr. Ekaete Ikpe, and Professor Tadesse Medani. Thank you very much for a lively
Thank you so
conversation.
much.
Yes.